The massive orbital station hung above the green and brown surface of Nexus 7 like a metal moon, and inside its steel walls, 300 cadets sat in rows of hard seats waiting for the briefing to begin. Cadet Vira pressed her 4 hands together and tried to stop them from shaking as the holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room, showing a rotating image of the planet below that would be her home for the next 72 hours. She was vision, her scales shimmering between blue and purple under the harsh station lights. And she had trained for 3 cycles to reach this moment. But nothing in her training had prepared her for the fear she felt right now. The instructor was a tall creature with gray skin and 6 eyes that seemed to look at everyone at once. And when he spoke, his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. "Cadets, you are about to undertake the final trial of your academy training," he announced. And the room fell completely silent. "You will be dropped onto the surface of Nexus 7, a Class 3 death world, and you will survive for 72 hours until extraction." Vira heard someone behind her make a sound like choking, and she understood exactly how they felt. The hologram changed to show images of the planet's surface, and what she saw made her stomach turn with fear. There were forests with trees that had thorns as long as her arm, and the briefing data said those thorns contained a poison that could kill a Kalari in minutes. There were creatures with too many legs and too many teeth, predators that hunted in packs and could smell blood from kilometers away. The ground itself was unstable, prone to earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that could open without warning. "The atmosphere is breathable but acidic," the instructor continued. And Vira noticed that even he seemed uncomfortable talking about this place. "Extended exposure will cause respiratory damage in most species, so you are advised to find shelter quickly." Next to Vira sat her podmates, the 3 other cadets she would be dropped with and hopefully survive alongside. Mectis was Kalari, a small being covered in soft fur with 3 breathing slits on his neck that were currently fluttering with panic, and his large eyes were wet with what might have been tears. Auron was Brevian, tall and thin with skin like bark and a face that never showed emotion. But Vira could see his hands gripping his seat so hard that cracks were forming in the armrest. And then there was the human. Cadet Marcus Chun sat at the end of their row, with his arms crossed over his chest and his legs stretched out in front of him. And he was watching the briefing hologram with an expression that Vira could not understand at all. He did not look scared. He did not even look worried. If anything, the human looked almost bored, like he was watching a presentation about station maintenance instead of a planet that had killed 47 cadets in the last 20 cycles. The instructor was now listing the many ways that cadets had died on previous trials, and the list was very long indeed. 17 cadets lost to predator attacks, he read from his data tablet. 12 to environmental hazards. 8 to toxic flora consumption, 6 to seismic events, and 4 to causes we were never able to determine. Vira felt sick, and she saw Mectis actually put his head between his knees. But Marcus raised his hand. The instructor stopped speaking, and all 6 of his eyes focused on the human with obvious confusion. "Yes, Cadet Chen, what is your question?" "I was just wondering," Marcus said in a casual voice that made Vira want to shake him. "Does the planet have any bodies of water? And if it does, is fishing allowed during the trial?" The room was completely silent. Vira turned to stare at the human and found that she was not alone, because every single cadet in the chamber was now looking at Marcus Chen like he had grown a second head. "I do not understand your question," the instructor said slowly. "Fishing," Marcus repeated, and he made a motion with his hands like he was throwing something and then pulling it back. "You know, catching water creatures for food. It is a survival technique from my homeworld, and I thought it might be useful." The instructor blinked all 6 of his eyes one after another. "Cadet, the aquatic life on Nexus 7 includes predators capable of dragging a full-grown Brevian under the surface in seconds. "So that is a yes on the water then," Marcus said with a small smile. "Good to know. Thank you." Vira did not know what to think. Either this human was completely insane, or humans as a species had something deeply wrong with them. The briefing continued for another hour, covering emergency protocols and extraction signals and the location of supply caches that might or might not still exist. And through all of it, Marcus Chun sat quietly with that same small smile on his face. When they were finally dismissed to prepare for the drop, Vira gathered her courage and approached him. "Human," she said, and Marcus turned to look at her with eyes that were surprisingly warm. "Are you not afraid of what awaits us down there?" Marcus seemed to think about the question for a moment. "Afraid is maybe not the right word," he said. "I am excited, actually. This reminds me of camping trips I used to take with my family back on Earth." "Camping trips," Vira repeated, not understanding the words. "Yeah, going out into the wilderness with just basic supplies and living off the land for a while, sleeping under the stars, cooking over a fire. It is fun." Vira felt her scale shift to a pale color that indicated deep confusion. "You do this for enjoyment on your homeworld. You voluntarily go to dangerous places and try to survive?" "All the time," Marcus confirmed with a nod. "There is this place called the Amazon. Huge jungle full of things that want to eat you or poison you, and people pay money to go hiking there." Vira made a mental note to look up this Amazon place in the Academy database. 1 hour later, they were strapped into their drop pod, a small metal container that would carry them down through the atmosphere and hopefully land them safely on the surface. Mectis was shaking so badly that his restraints were rattling, and Oren had closed his eyes like he was trying to meditate, and Vira was gripping her safety harness with all 4 hands. Marcus was looking out the small window at the planet growing larger below them, and he was smiling. "Beautiful planet," he said to no one in particular. "Look at all that green. I bet there are some really interesting creatures down there." The pod began to shake as they hit the upper atmosphere, and Vira felt fear grip her heart. This was it, the beginning of the worst 72 hours of her life. She looked at the human one more time and saw that he was still smiling, still calm, still acting like this was some kind of vacation. Vira did not know whether to feel reassured or terrified by his attitude. The pod screamed through the sky toward the deadly world below, and somewhere in the chaos of the descent, Vira heard Marcus Chun let out a sound she had never heard before. He was laughing. The human was actually laughing as they plummeted toward a planet that wanted to kill them. In that moment, Vera realized that whatever happened on Nexus 7, the human would be the strangest part of the whole experience. She had no idea how right she was. The drop pod hit the ground hard, much harder than Vira had expected, and for a moment everything was noise and chaos and the sound of metal screaming against rock. When the shaking finally stopped, Vira opened her eyes and looked around at her podmates. Mectis was still strapped into his seat, all 3 of his breathing slits working overtime as he gasped for air, and his fur was standing straight up in fear. Oren was moving slowly, reaching down to touch his left leg, and when he pulled his hand back, Vera saw that his bark-like skin had cracked and something that looked like green sap was leaking out. "I am injured," Oren said in his slow and careful voice. "I do not think I can walk properly." Vira felt panic rising in her chest. They had been on this planet for less than a minute, and already one of their group was wounded. "Everyone stay calm," came a voice from behind her. And Vira turned to see Marcus already out of his restraints and moving toward the pod door. "Let me check outside first and make sure we did not land in anything dangerous." He pressed the release button and the door hissed open, letting in air that smelled strange and felt slightly wrong against Vera's scales. Marcus stepped outside and was gone for almost a full minute, during which time Vira and the others sat in terrified silence. When he came back, He was nodding to himself like he had just finished inspecting a new apartment. "Okay, good news and bad news," he said. "Good news is we landed in a jungle basin with lots of cover and what looks like fresh water about 200 meters east. Bad news is my motion tracker is picking up 17 distinct life forms within 100 meters of us." 17 predators, Mectis whispered, his voice breaking. "Probably not all predators," Marcus said with a shrug. "Some might just be scavengers waiting to see if we die. Anyway, we should move to a more defensible position before dark." Vera checked her environmental scanner and felt her heart sink. The atmosphere was indeed acidic, just as the briefing had warned, and the temperature was already dropping as the sun moved toward the horizon. They had maybe 2 hours of light left. "Can you walk at all?" Marcus asked Oren, kneeling down to look at his injured leg. "I can try," Oren replied, "but I will be slow." "That is fine. Slow is better than staying here." Marcus opened the emergency supply kit that had been stored in the pod and began pulling out items, examining each one with quick and practiced movements. "Okay, we have ration packs for 3 days, water purification tablets, emergency blankets, a basic medical kit, and 1 signal flare for extraction," he listed off. "Not bad. We can work with this." Vira watched in amazement as the human took charge without even asking if anyone minded. He helped Aran to his feet and showed Mectis how to support him from the other side. Then he grabbed the supply pack and slung it over his shoulder. "Vira, you take the rear and let me know if anything follows us," he said, and Vira found herself nodding without even thinking about it. They moved through the jungle slowly, with Marcus leading the way and using a large stick to push aside plants that might be dangerous. The forest around them was alive with sounds, clicks and whistles, and deep rumbling calls that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "This reminds me of the Amazon," Marcus said casually as they walked. "Except the trees here are bigger and the colors are different. But the feel is the same, you know?" "You mentioned this Amazon before," Vira said, keeping her voice low. "Is it truly as dangerous as this place?" "Oh, definitely. Maybe even more dangerous in some ways," Marcus replied. "There are snakes that can squeeze you to death. Fish that can eat your flesh down to the bone in minutes. Insects that carry diseases that have killed millions of my people. And that is just the beginning." Mectis made a small sound of horror. "And your people go there voluntarily?" Vira asked, remembering what he had said before. "All the time. It is a popular tourist destination." Vira did not know what tourist meant, but she decided she did not want to know. They walked for almost an hour before Marcus held up his hand and signaled them to stop. "This looks good," he said, pointing to a rocky outcropping that formed a natural shelter with walls on 3 sides. "We can defend this if we need to, and the rocks will block the wind." They helped Arun sit down against the back wall, and Marcus immediately went to work on his leg. "The bone is not broken," he announced after examining the injury, "but the crack in your outer layer is deep, and you are losing fluid. I need to seal it somehow." He looked around the clearing, then walked over to one of the strange plants growing nearby. "What are you doing?" Vira called out in alarm as Marcus reached toward the plant. "Looking for sap or resin," he replied, carefully examining the trunk. "Some plants produce sticky substances that can be used to seal wounds. Here we go." He used his knife to cut into the bark, and a thick yellow substance oozed out. "Are you insane?" Mectis shouted, which was the loudest sound Vira had ever heard him make. "That could be poisonous." Marcus sniffed the substance, then touched a tiny bit to his tongue. Everyone screamed. "It is fine," Marcus said after a moment. "Tastes bitter but not toxic. Definitely some kind of natural adhesive." He brought the substance back to Oren and carefully applied it to the crack in his leg, smoothing it over the wound like paste. "That should hold until we get you to proper medical care," Marcus said, wiping his hands on his uniform. Vera stared at him with all four of her eyes wide open. "You could have died," she said. "You tasted something from an unknown Deathworld plant, and you could have died." Marcus looked at her with genuine confusion. "But I did not die," he said. Like that was all that mattered. As darkness fell over the jungle, Marcus gathered wood and dry leaves and announced that he was going to make a fire. "Do you have a heating tool in your kit?" Vira asked. "No, but I do not need one." He found 2 pieces of wood and began rubbing them together rapidly, and Vira watched with fascination as smoke began to rise from the friction point. "That is impossible," Mectis said, checking his species database on his datapad. "The Kalari Scientific Archives say that friction fire starting is theoretically possible, but so inefficient that no intelligent species would actually use it. We used it for thousands of years," Marcus said, blowing gently on the smoking wood until a small flame appeared. "It is basic survival training for most humans." The fire grew and warmth spread through their small camp, and for the first time since landing, Vira felt some of her fear fade away. Then she heard it, a deep rumbling growl from somewhere in the darkness, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps coming closer. Everyone except Marcus froze in terror. Through the trees emerged a creature that made Vira want to scream. It was huge, at least twice her height, with 6 legs covered in armored plates and a head full of fangs that dripped with something that smelled like burning metal. This was an apex predator of Nexus 7, and it was looking right at them. Marcus stood up slowly. "What are you doing?" Vira hissed. The human did not answer her. Instead, he reached down and grabbed a burning branch from the fire. Then he took 3 steps toward the monster and raised the branch high. And then Marcus Chun did something that Vira would remember for the rest of her life. He yelled. Not a scream of fear, but a deep aggressive roar that seemed to shake the air itself. And he waved the fire in front of him like a weapon and stamped his feet on the ground. The creature stopped. Its many eyes blinked in confusion, and it actually took a step backward. Marcus yelled again and threw a rock at its head, and the creature made a sound that was almost like a whimper before turning and running back into the darkness. The jungle was silent. Marcus came back to the fire and sat down like nothing unusual had happened. Most predators do not like fire or loud noises, he explained calmly. You just have to show them you are not easy prey. Vira, Mectis, and Orin all stared at him with identical expressions of shock. You are insane, Mectis finally said. I get that a lot, Marcus replied with a smile. That night, while the others tried to sleep, Vira noticed that Marcus stayed awake, sitting by the fire and watching the darkness with patient eyes. She asked him if he was going to rest. I will sleep when we are extracted, he said quietly. Someone has to keep watch, and humans are pretty good at going without sleep when we need to. Vira did not sleep much that night, but knowing the human was watching over them made the darkness feel just a little less frightening. She was beginning to understand something important about humans. They were not just surviving on death worlds. They were built for them. The second day on Nexus 7 began with pale light filtering through the thick canopy and the sound of strange creatures calling to each other in the distance. Vira woke to find Marcus already moving around the camp, checking their supplies and examining the perimeter like he had been awake for hours. Because he probably had been awake for hours, she realized. Good morning, the human said, cheerfully when he saw her eyes open. How are you feeling? Vera stretched her forearms and took stock of her body, finding aches and pains in places she did not know could hurt. I am alive, she said, which is more than I expected. Marcus laughed at that, a warm sound that seemed completely out of place on a death world. Mectis was awake too, his fur matted and dirty, his eyes still carrying the look of someone who had not slept well at all. Arun was checking his leg and seemed pleased to find that the strange plant sap had hardened overnight into something like a protective shell. "I can put some weight on it now," he reported. "The pain is less than yesterday." "Good, because we need to start moving toward the extraction point," Marcus said, pulling out a small map from the supply kit. "It is about 12 kilometers northwest, and we have roughly 30 hours to get there." 12 kilometers did not sound like much to Vira, but then she looked at the jungle around them and remembered what lived in it. "There is another problem," Marcus continued, his voice becoming more serious. "We are almost out of ration packs. We have maybe enough for one more meal each." Mektis made a frightened sound. "What are we going to do?" he asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking out into the jungle with a thoughtful expression on his face. "I am going to go hunting," he announced. Vera felt her scales shift to the white color of shock. "Hunting," she repeated. "You are going to hunt the creatures of this death world." "That is the plan," Marcus said, picking up his knife and beginning to sharpen a long straight branch he had found. "There are animals out there, and animals mean food. It is basic survival math." "But everything on this planet is designed to kill us," Mektis protested. "Not everything, and besides, I have hunted dangerous animals before." Marcus finished sharpening the branch into a crude spear and tested its weight with a few practice throws. "Anyone want to come with me?" he asked, looking at each of them in turn. No one moved? "Fair enough. Stay here and keep the fire going. I will be back in a few hours." And with that, the human walked into the jungle and disappeared among the massive trees. Vira and the others sat in terrified silence, expecting at any moment to hear screams or the sounds of a struggle. 1 hour passed, then 2 hours. Mektis had started pacing back and forth, his fur standing on end with worry. "He is dead," Mektis said. "He has to be dead. Nothing could survive out there alone." Oren said nothing, but his eyes kept moving to the spot where Marcus had vanished. Vira tried to stay calm, but her hearts were beating fast and her mind was filled with terrible images of what might have happened to the human. Then they heard something. Footsteps coming through the jungle, heavy and slow. Vira grabbed a rock and prepared to defend herself, while Mektis hid behind Oren despite his injury. The bushes parted and Marcus Chun emerged from the green darkness. He was dragging something behind him. It was the body of an apex predator, the same kind of creature that had come to their camp the night before, and it was very clearly dead. Marcus had a cut on his arm that was bleeding red human blood, but he was smiling like he had just won a game. "Found dinner," he announced, dropping the creature in the middle of their camp. Vera could not speak. She stared at the massive predator, easily 3 times the size of the human who had killed it, and tried to understand what she was seeing. "How?" she finally managed to say. Marcus shrugged like it was not a big deal. "Tracked it to its den, waited for it to come out, hit it with the spear, then finished it with my knife when it got close," he explained. "It was not easy, but it was not the hardest hunt I have ever done." "Your arm," Oren said, pointing at the wound. Marcus looked down at the cut like he had forgotten it was there. "Oh, this, yeah, it caught me with one of its claws. It is just a scratch, though, nothing serious." Vira had seen the claws on those creatures, and she knew that a strike from one should have taken the human's arm off completely. How was he still standing, let alone calling it a scratch? Marcus cleaned his wound with water and wrapped it with a piece of cloth from the medical kit, then turned his attention to the dead predator. "Okay. The tricky part is preparing the meat," he said, pulling out his knife. "This species is venomous, which means the poison sacs are probably near the head. We need to remove those carefully before cooking." "You are going to eat it?" Mektis asked, his voice high with disbelief. "We are all going to eat it," Marcus corrected, "unless you want to starve." Over the next hour, Vira watched in fascination as Marcus butchered the creature with skilled movements that showed he had done this kind of thing many times before. He removed the parts that might be dangerous, cut the meat into portions, and built up the fire until it was hot enough for cooking. The smell of roasting meat filled the camp, and despite her fear, Vira found that she was very hungry. "Is it truly safe?" she asked when Marcus handed her a piece. "I ate some first to test it," he said. "That was 20 minutes ago, and I feel fine. So yes, it should be safe." Vira took a small bite and found that it was actually quite good. As they ate their first real meal since landing, Marcus began to talk about his homeworld. "Earth is actually classified as a death world too. Did you know that?" he said casually. Mectis nearly choked on his food. "That cannot be true," the Kalari said. "You would not have developed civilization on a death world." "Look it up in your database," Marcus suggested. Mectis pulled out his datapad with trembling hands and searched for information on Earth. His eyes grew wider and wider as he read. Extreme temperature variations, active volcanic and seismic zones, predators in every environment, poisonous flora and fauna across all continents. He read aloud. "This planet has something called a hippopotamus that kills more sentient beings per year than most military conflicts." "Hippos are terrifying," Marcus agreed. "But they are not even the worst. There are these things called mosquitoes. Tiny flying insects that have killed more humans throughout history than all wars combined." Vira felt dizzy. "And you said there is a place called the Amazon that people visit for fun." She remembered. "Oh yeah, the Amazon is great. But there's also a continent called Australia that makes the Amazon look tame," Marcus said with a fond smile. "Everything in Australia is trying to kill you. The snakes, the spiders, the jellyfish, even some of the plants. And people live there," Oren asked slowly. "About 25 million of them. They seem to like it." Mectis put down his datapad and stared at Marcus with an expression that mixed fear and respect. "Your species is insane," he said. "We prefer the term adaptable," Marcus replied with a grin. That night, Marcus taught them songs from Earth. Vira did not understand all the words, but the melodies were simple and somehow comforting, and for a little while she almost forgot that she was on a planet designed to kill her. She watched the human as he sang, this strange creature who had killed an apex predator with a sharpened stick and called it normal. And she noticed something important. Marcus still had not slept. "Are you ever going to rest?" she asked him quietly. "I told you, I will sleep when we are extracted," he said. "Humans can go a long time without sleep if we need to. It is not comfortable, but it is possible." "How long?" "The record is about 11 days, but I would not recommend it. I have personally done 4 days during a training exercise, and that was rough enough." Vira calculated the time in her head. By the time they reached extraction, Marcus would have been awake for over 3 days, and he was planning to spend all of that time protecting them. She did not know how to feel about this human anymore. He was terrifying and reassuring at the same time. He came from a death world and treated this death world like a vacation. And despite everything, despite the danger and the fear and the impossibility of their situation, Vira was starting to believe that they might actually survive. Because Marcus-chan would not let them die. It was not in his nature. The third and final day on Nexus 7 started with the ground shaking. Vira woke to the feeling of the earth moving beneath her, and for a terrible moment she thought she was back in the drop pod, falling toward the planet all over again. But then she opened her eyes and saw the trees swaying above her, and she heard the distant rumble of something massive happening far below the surface. "Earthquake," Marcus shouted, already on his feet. "Everyone move away from the rocks now." Vira scrambled to obey, grabbing Mectis by the arm and pulling him toward the center of the clearing. Oren tried to stand, but his injured leg gave out, and he would have fallen if Marcus had not caught him. The shaking continued for almost a minute, long enough for cracks to appear in the rocky outcropping that had been their shelter. long enough for several trees at the edge of the clearing to topple over with enormous crashing sounds. And then it stopped. The jungle was silent in a way it had never been before, every creature holding its breath and waiting to see what would happen next. Marcus checked his equipment and looked at the map with worried eyes. "The extraction point is about 8 kilometers away," he said, his voice serious. "And we have approximately 6 hours to get there before the shuttle leaves." "Can we make it in time?" Vira asked. "We have to. There is no other choice." They gathered what little supplies they had left and began moving through the jungle as fast as Oren's injury would allow. But the earthquake had changed everything. Paths that had been clear before were now blocked by fallen trees, and the ground itself had shifted in places, creating new dangers with every step. And then they started to notice the smoke. It rose in the distance, dark and thick against the pale sky, and Marcus stopped to study it with narrowed eyes. "Volcanic activity," he said. "The earthquake must have triggered something. We need to move faster." They pushed on, but the jungle seemed to be working against them now. The air grew warmer and more acidic, making it harder to breathe. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, the calls of panicked animals fleeing from something behind them. Marcus suddenly held up his hand and everyone stopped. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Vira listened and felt her blood run cold. It was a rumbling sound, getting closer, like thunder rolling across the ground. "Stampede," Marcus said, his voice urgent. "The wildlife is running from the volcanic activity, and they are heading right toward us. We need to get to high ground now." He pointed to a rocky ridge about 50 meters away, and without waiting for agreement, he grabbed Oren and started moving. Vera took hold of Mectis and followed, her 4 legs carrying her faster than she had ever run before. The rumbling grew louder and louder, and through the gaps in the trees, Vera could see shapes moving, hundreds of creatures of all sizes running together in blind panic. They reached the ridge just in time. Marcus practically threw Oren up the slope and then turned to help Mectis climb, his human strength surprising Vira once again. She scrambled up the rocks as the first wave of animals crashed through the space, where they had been standing just moments before. It was chaos, a river of terrified creatures flowing past them without stopping, and the noise was so loud that Vera could not hear her own thoughts. After what felt like forever, the stampede passed and the jungle fell quiet again. But they were not safe. Looking ahead, Vira could see that their problems were only beginning. The volcanic ridge they needed to cross to reach the extraction point was now glowing with heat, and rivers of molten rock were flowing down its slopes. "The path is blocked," Mectis whispered, his voice full of despair. Vera felt the same despair rising in her own chest. They had come so far and survived so much, but now it seemed like the planet itself was determined to stop them. And then Marcus Chan did something that shocked her. He laughed. It was not a crazy laugh or a desperate laugh, but a genuine sound of amusement. "Finally," he said, cracking his knuckles, "some excitement." Everyone stared at him like he had lost his mind. "Did you not hear me?" Mectis shouted. "The path is blocked. There is literal fire between us and the extraction point." "I heard you," Marcus said, studying the ridge with careful eyes. "But blocked does not mean impossible. Look there. You see that darker area between the lava flows?" Vira looked where he was pointing and saw what he meant. There was a narrow strip of rock that looked cooler than the rest, winding between the rivers of molten stone. "That is insane," Oren said, which was the most emotion Vira had ever heard from the Brevian. "Probably," Marcus agreed, "but it is also our only option, unless you want to stay here and wait for the next earthquake or stampede." He did not wait for an answer. Marcus led the way toward the ridge, testing each step on the hot ground before committing his weight. "Stay close to me and step exactly where I step," he called back. The lava crust can support our weight if it is thick enough. But if you step in the wrong place, you will fall through. Vira had never been more terrified in her entire life. The heat was intense, making her scales feel like they were cooking, and the air shimmered with waves of warmth that made it hard to see. Marcus moved with careful confidence, sometimes stopping to touch the rock with his bare hands before deciding which way to go. His hands must have been burning, Vira thought, but he did not show any sign of pain. Halfway across the ridge, a flying predator appeared in the sky above them. It was huge, with wings that blocked out the light and talons that looked sharp enough to cut through metal. And it was diving toward Mectis. Vera saw it coming, but could not move fast enough to help. The narrow path left no room for quick action. But Marcus could. The human launched himself at the creature as it dove, colliding with it in midair and wrapping his arms around its neck. They fell together onto a rocky outcropping, and for a terrible moment, Vira could not see what was happening through the smoke and heat. She heard sounds of struggle, screeches from the creature, and grunts from the human. Then Marcus stood up, and the flying predator was not moving anymore. "Come on," he shouted, rejoining them on the path like nothing had happened. "We are almost there." Vira looked at him and saw that his uniform was torn, and there was blood running from new cuts on his face and arms. But he was still moving, still leading them forward. The final stretch was the worst. The path narrowed until they had to walk single file, with lava flowing on both sides close enough to touch. Marcus carried Oren on his back, moving with steady steps, despite the weight and the heat and the exhaustion that must have been overwhelming after 3 days without sleep. And then they were through. They stumbled out onto cooler ground on the other side of the ridge, and ahead of them, Vera could see the extraction plateau. 2 kilometers, Marcus said, checking his map. "We have 30 minutes. We are going to make it." They ran as fast as they could, which was not very fast given their injuries and exhaustion, but Marcus kept pushing them forward. Behind them, the volcano continued to rumble, and more lava began to flow, but they did not look back. When the extraction plateau finally came into view, Vera felt tears forming in her eyes. A rescue shuttle was already descending from the sky, its lights flashing in the smoke-filled air. "We made it," Mectis sobbed. "We actually made it." Marcus did not celebrate. He kept moving until they were safely on the plateau, and only then did he finally stop and let Oran slide off his back. Vira looked at the human and saw how tired he truly was. His eyes were red and unfocused. His body was covered in cuts and burns, and he was swaying on his feet like he might fall over at any moment. But he was smiling. That same small smile he had worn since the beginning, like this had all been exactly what he expected. "Told you we would make it," he said. And then the shuttle landed, and Academy personnel came rushing out to help them. But Vira could not stop looking at the human who had saved them all. Marcus Chen, who had called a Class 3 death world a vacation. She was beginning to understand why the galaxy feared humans. It was not because they were strong or fast or smart. It was because they simply refused to give up. No matter what the universe threw at them, humans just kept going. And that was more terrifying than any death world could ever be. The rescue shuttle doors opened, and Academy instructors rushed out with medical equipment and trauma counselors, their faces showing the kind of professional concern that came from seeing too. Many cadets returned from Nexus 7 broken in body and mind. Mectis collapsed into the arms of a medical officer immediately, his small body shaking with sobs that he had been holding back for 3 days. Oren was rushed to a medical stretcher, and Vira could hear the doctors talking urgently about his leg injury and how lucky he was that infection had not set in. Vera stood still for a moment, letting the reality wash over her. She had survived. Against all odds, against all the statistics and warnings and horror stories, she had survived a Class 3 death world. A counselor approached her with gentle hands and kind words, asking if she was injured, asking if she needed anything. "I am fine," Vira heard herself say. "The human kept us alive." She turned to look at Marcus and found him sitting on a flat rock at the edge of the plateau, eating a ration bar from the shuttle supplies and watching the sunset through the volcanic haze. His body was a map of injuries, cuts and burns and bruises covering almost every visible surface, and his eyes were so tired that he looked like he might fall asleep sitting up. But he was still calm, still peaceful, still watching the deadly planet like it was beautiful instead of terrifying. The lead instructor approached Marcus with slow and careful steps, and Vera recognized her as Admiral Lissara, a decorated Deshan officer who had survived 3 Death World missions herself. "Cadet Chen," the Admiral said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. Marcus looked up and gave a casual salute that made several of the other officers gasp at its informality. "Admiral," he replied. "Your vitals have been monitored throughout this trial," Lissara said, checking a datapad in her hands. "According to our readings, you experienced the least amount of stress of any survivor in this trial's entire history." Marcus shrugged. "I was pretty comfortable for most of it," he admitted. "Comfortable," the Admiral repeated, her scale shifting to a color Vira recognized as disbelief. "You were on a Class 3 Death World for 72 hours without sleep. You sustained 17 distinct injuries. You killed 2 apex predators with primitive weapons. And you carried an injured teammate across an active volcanic zone." "Yeah, it was a good workout," Marcus agreed. The Admiral stared at him for a long moment. "Your actions saved your entire pod," she finally said. "All 3 of your teammates have reported that they would have died multiple times without your intervention. That is exceptional performance by any standard." "Thank you, Admiral. Do you have anything else to say about your experience, Cadet Chun?" Marcus thought about it for a moment. That same thoughtful expression on his face that Vira had come to recognize over the past 3 days. "Yeah, actually," he said. "I was wondering if there's a Class 4 or Class 5 trial available. This one was nice, but it felt more like orientation than a real challenge." The silence that followed was so complete that Vira could hear the distant rumbling of the volcano. Every officer on the plateau turned to stare at the human. Several of them checked their translators to make sure they had heard correctly. Admiral Lissara opened her mouth, closed it, and then opened it again. "You want a more dangerous trial," she said slowly. "If possible, yeah," Marcus confirmed. "I mean, this planet is great and everything. But once you get used to the predators and the environment, it is actually pretty manageable. I was kind of hoping for something that would really test my limits." Vira watched Admiral Lissara's face go through about 15 different emotions in the span of 5 seconds. Finally, the Admiral turned to one of her aides and spoke in a low voice. "Add a note to Cadet Chun's permanent file." "What should the note say, Admiral?" Lissara looked at Marcus one more time. Her expression caught somewhere between respect and horror. "Do not deploy to Death Worlds below Class 6. Human will get bored." Marcus grinned at that. "Thank you, Admiral. I appreciate it." The shuttle ride back to the orbital station was quiet. Most of the rescued cadets were sleeping or receiving medical attention, their ordeal finally over. Marcus was the exception. He sat by one of the windows, still awake, still watching as Nexus 7 grew smaller below them. Vira moved to sit next to him. "Human," she said, and then corrected herself. "Marcus." He turned to look at her with those strange soft eyes that did not belong on someone who had done what he had done. "What is up, Vira?" "I wanted to thank you," she said, and the words felt insufficient for what he had done. "You saved my life. You saved all of our lives. And I do not understand why you risked so much for people you barely knew." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "On Earth, we have this saying," he finally said. leave no one behind. It is kind of built into us, I think. The idea that when things get tough, you stick with your team no matter what. But we are not your team. We are strangers from different species. You are my podmates, Marcus said simply. That made you my team. It is not complicated. Vira did not know what to say to that. Back on the orbital station, the surviving cadets were processed through medical checks and debriefing sessions that lasted for hours. Vira answered questions about everything that had happened, and she noticed that the officers paid special attention whenever she mentioned Marcus. They wrote things down and exchanged meaningful looks. She realized that humans were still relatively new to the Galactic Coalition, and that many species were still trying to understand them. After the debriefing, Vera made her way to the station's database terminal and did something she had been meaning to do since landing on Nexus 7. She looked up Earth. What she found made her scales turn pale with shock. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, one of the most dangerous known planets in the galaxy that still supported intelligent life. The list of threats was endless. Extreme temperatures, natural disasters, venomous creatures in every environment, diseases that could wipe out entire populations, predators that had shaped human evolution for millions of years. And the humans had not just survived on this nightmare world. They had thrived. They had built civilizations and developed technology and spread across their planet's surface until there was no corner left unexplored. They had done all of this while living alongside creatures called great white sharks and saltwater, crocodiles and king cobras and box jellyfish. They had climbed their tallest mountains and dived into their deepest oceans and crossed their most deadly deserts, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. No wonder Marcus had treated Nexus 7 like a vacation, Vira thought. Compared to Earth, it probably was. 3 months later, Vera stood in front of a duty assignment terminal, making a decision that would change the course of her career. She had options, good options, safe postings on civilized worlds where the biggest danger was paperwork. But instead, she typed in a specific request. She wanted to be assigned to Marcus Chun's unit, wherever that might be. The terminal asked her to confirm her choice and provide a reason. Laura thought about everything she had seen and experienced on Nexus 7, about the human who had faced death with a smile and called it fun. She typed her answer. Because wherever Cadet Chung goes, survival is statistically guaranteed. She paused, then added one more line. Also, I want to see this Australia place for myself. The request was approved within the hour. Vira did not know it yet, but she would come to deeply regret that second part of her statement. Australia was everything Marcus had promised and worse. But that is a story for another time. What matters is that Vira learned something important during her 72 hours on Nexus 7, something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. The galaxy was full of dangers, full of death worlds and predators and disasters that could end a life in an instant. But the galaxy also had humans. And as long as you had a human on your side, nothing was truly impossible. They came from a world that tried to kill them every day, and they had turned that struggle into strength. They faced horror with humor and danger with determination. They refused to give up, refused to accept defeat, refused to let their teammates fall. The Galactic Coalition had discovered many strange and wonderful species over the millennia, but none of them were quite like humanity. And Vira, for one, was grateful to have them as allies. Even if they were completely and utterly insane,